that Donald Trump has revealed to us, that is cabinet governance. Right. We have, when George Washington became President of the United States, when he announced his cabinet, there were 4 people. They could sit around one of these tables and still have room for another group of folks to come join them. And we knew who they were. We make plays on Broadway about them to this day. These were very prominent figures, well understood. Jefferson, Hamilton. I mean, it wasn't a debatable point. We may have disagreed with them on some issues, but it wasn't a mystery. Today, when someone becomes President of the United States, they have the ability to appoint roughly 4,000 people to positions of enormous power. And these are largely unexamined people. And I believe, remember our point here being that Donald Trump reveals the vulnerabilities of the American process? I'm sorry. Did we sign on for something that was going to make Betsy DeVos the Secretary of Education? Because I sure did not. And I got to tell you something. During that entire 2016 campaign, I never heard that Betsy DeVos was going to be the Secretary of Education. I never heard that Scott Pruitt was going to run the Environmental Protection Agency. I never heard that Jeff Sessions, who was unacceptable to be a federal judge in the Reagan era, was somehow going to be in charge of a department called Justice. We have a real problem here. We give a president whose political party is in control of the United States Senate, as this president is, carte blanche to put absolutely incompetent and wrong-headed and destructive people in charge of agencies that have more employees and bigger budgets than most of the countries in the world. And something has to change in that regard, brothers and sisters. Presidential candidates in the future should run telling us who they are going to put in their cabinet, because the fact of the matter is, it shouldn't be a surprise after the election. We shouldn't have to wake up to have Jeff Sessions as our Attorney General. Because the fact of the matter is, this cabinet that Trump has put together, we really need to understand what we're talking about here. He has put people into positions of power whose primary function is to prove that the agency they are headed, to prove that the name of that agency is a lie. The biggest opponent of environmental protection in charge of the Environmental Protection Agency. The guy who doesn't believe in public housing in charge of housing and urban development. Somebody who doesn't believe in health and human services in charge of health and human services. And somebody who a Republican-controlled Senate in 1986 said, I'm sorry, you tried to put African Americans in jail for registering other African Americans to vote? 1986, when that was revealed about Jeff Sessions, a Republican-controlled Senate said, you can't be anywhere near the federal courts in this country. And now, 30 years later, we say the guy who tried to prevent African Americans in the 1980s from registering other African Americans to vote should be in charge of a department called Justice and should be overseeing civil rights and voting rights law in this country. This is fundamentally wrong, and it is a bait and switch. Donald Trump didn't tell us he was going to do this, even if you disagreed with him throughout that campaign. He has assembled a wrecking crew cabinet that is literally destroying the federal government of the United States and undermining the security and health and humanity of this country. We shouldn't just be mad at Donald Trump. We should be mad at a system that allows him to take power of the whole of that federal government and to put people in those positions who should never, ever be in those positions. And I want to just give you one anecdote to give you a sense of how bad it is. how bad this cabinet governance is. When Betsy DeVos came before the Education Committee of the Senate, she was questioned by a number of senators. It was an agonizing experience to watch. Because Betsy DeVos, she never went to public school. She didn't send her children to public school. She never served on a school board. She never served on a state board of education. She never taught education. She never wrote a respected book about education. I mean, this is not a person who had established a track record in the area of education except in one area, and that was saying that we should take the money that we put into public education and give it to private schools and to privatizers, people who want to make money off education for themselves. And why was she able to do that? Because she's rich. And Betsy DeVos didn't have any qualification whatsoever to talk about education except the fact that she was rich. And that she gave a tremendous amount of money to Republican candidates for office. And when I mean tremendous, I'm actually talking big here. It's estimated that she gave roughly her family, roughly $225 million to Republican candidates over a 20-year period. She wrote an op-ed for a newspaper in Washington. She said, I give money to get results. I don't give money because I respect people or I like them or, I give money to buy things. I'm purchasing governance. So she got before that committee and they asked her about education programs in this country, and she couldn't answer the questions. She got them wrong. Maggie Hassan, the very good senator from New Hampshire, was asking her about programs for children with disabilities. Betsy DeVos started talking on about the states, and Maggie Hassan interrupted her and said, you do understand that's a federal program. And Betsy DeVos was like, right. The woman literally didn't know the basic programs in the department she was going to have. But that's not really the amazing thing about the hearing. The amazing thing about the hearing was when they finally moved over to one of the last senators to ask questions, Bernie Sanders. And, I think it's maybe even unfair that Bernie Sanders is allowed to question billionaires. I thought he ran, he said, I'm against the billionaire class. He said, my campaign is not funded by the billionaires. It seems almost as if he has a little antipathy toward billionaires who give a lot of money in politics. So he's there and he looks at her and goes, Mrs. DeVos, if I may, how's it going? Been a rough day, but I think I can make it. Okay. So I just got one question for you. Do you really think that if your family hadn't given $250 million to Republican candidates for office, including many senators on this committee, if your family hadn't given $225 million, do you think you'd be sitting here today? And in one of the greatest moments of honesty in the history of the Trump administration, Betsy DeVos did not say, oh yeah, of course I'd be here. I know education top to bottom. I've been on the school board. I've been on the state board of education. I've written books. I've taught. But she couldn't say any of those things. So she kind of swallows hard and she goes, I don't know, maybe. But the other fact of the matter is, if your answer to the question of whether you should sit in a position that defines so many aspects of public education in this country is, I don't know, maybe, then I don't know, maybe you shouldn't be our Secretary of Education. The number one vulnerability is you don't have to win to be president. Number two vulnerability is when you become president, you get to put a lot of people into positions of power without the accountability that a democratic system should provide. In other countries, when they run, they announce their front bench, they announce who's going to be in these positions of power. We don't do it. That's a very unhealthy and dangerous thing. So what's the third vulnerability, Mr. Nichols? The third vulnerability that Donald Trump revealed is the most serious of them all. and that we have a media system in this country that does not know how to cover politics anymore. In fact, we have a media system in this country that, and there are great journalists. I'm a journalist. I love doing the craft. I started at 11, and I will literally be the last one out of the newsroom. I will shut the lights out when it's all over. But that doesn't mean that the overall system is working. And Donald Trump revealed that because Donald Trump is not a successful businessman. In fact, Donald Trump's specialty in business was going bankrupt. Donald Trump was a reality TV star. He was good at media. He was good at entertainment. And he figured out our media system. Again, not the individual journalists who do a good job, but the overall system. The fact is that as advertising has fled out of newspapers and out of radio and increasingly out of television, and it's gone into our phones, right? It's directed to you. You know when you open up your internet site, ads start popping up at you. The resources that were traditionally there to fund newspapers, to make good newsrooms, that money isn't there anymore. And so increasingly our media system has dumbed down. Online, in broadcast, it's obsessed with ratings and clicks. It wants to have the thing that is the most shocking in the moment, that grabs you. So usually it's weather, right? It's like there's a storm coming. It's one sunny day after another in Arizona. I promise you, you turn your news on tonight, I don't care. It's like, well, we might have a nuclear war, but first the weather. The weather is always first and foremost. And why is it first and foremost? Because it costs nothing to cover it. The government gives you the weather stats. And everybody is affected by it. So even if nothing's happening, we all care about the weather. Well, they were looking for something, they were looking for a way to do politics like that, right? And Donald Trump figured it out. When he came down that elevator, on the day he announced his candidacy, he didn't come down and say, I'm a good businessman, I know how to do stuff, I know how to run things, I got some great ideas, I've assembled these brilliant people. No. He comes down there and immediately starts talking about immigration. The days right now, he immediately starts saying, oh, Mexicans are rapists. You're like, well, what? And then, in shorter, refugees, we're going to ban Muslims. And again, he's saying incredibly outrageous things that you literally are like, you're in shock by. But when he's challenged on it, instead of backing down, he gives you more of it, right? He always doubles down on the thing. And the thing is, he had figured out that our media system that is obsessed with ratings and clicks has become a dumb beast. And when a dumb beast is hungry, you put a bowl of food out for it and it comes and eats. And Donald Trump puts a bowl of food out for the dumb beast every morning. It's called a tweet. Yeah. And the fact of the matter is, this is the genius of Donald Trump. Give him his due. He figured out he can be the central story of every discussion because he just pushes something more out there. And the other candidates who are being responsible, poor Hillary Clinton. She's like, no, I have a responsibility to talk about the issues. I have to speak within certain parameters. I might be president of the United States. The world is watching. These are critical moments. I have to be a responsible human being. And Donald Trump says, I don't have to. And the fact of the matter is, our media system responded to that. And he kept putting the bowl out every time. Let me give you an example of the extent to which he did it. When you're a nominee of a major political party, you're roughly going to get 45% of the vote right off the bat. That's the given, okay? So Donald Trump needed to become the Republican nominee. He was a disruptive force within his party. In that period before the primaries began, that was the critical time in which he defined himself. There's a thing called the Tyndall Report. They analyze every minute of news that's devoted simply to one candidate. Not to other candidates, not to the race and hope, but to one candidate. When the Tyndall Report came out at the end of the pre-primary period, it found that Donald Trump had gotten 80 full minutes which is huge, by the way. This is on the evening news, the major newscast. He had gotten 80 full minutes of news coverage. Donald Trump at that point was at 30% in the polls. He was doing reasonably well in New Hampshire. He was doing reasonably well in Iowa. He was disrupting the process there. Here's another guy who was at 30% in the polls at the same time, Bernie Sanders. He was doing exactly the same poll numbers. He was doing reasonably well in Iowa. He was doing reasonably well in New Hampshire. The Tyndall report, remember Trump 80 full minutes? Tyndall report at that same point found that Bernie Sanders had gotten 1 minute. 80-to-1 ratio. Now, Hillary Clinton, some of the other Republicans, they were in the low middle of that thing, nowhere near Trump. He was literally wiping everybody out. But Bernie Sanders was polling at roughly the same point. We got 1 minute. And I thought to myself, as you should, wow, what was the 1 minute? What? How did he get the minute? What was it? And then you found out, this Media Matters actually did this fascinating thing. It wasn't a full minute. It was 20 seconds on the ABC Evening News. So it wasn't 80-to-1, because I'm not good at math, but 20 seconds is a third of a minute. It was 240-to-1. And when you have a 240-to-1 ratio, what that tells you is that you should ask another question. What if Bernie Sanders had gotten half of the attention that Donald Trump got? What if he had gotten 10% of the attention that Donald Trump got? Would we have had a fundamentally different result? Could we have had a fundamentally different result in this country? And when that question comes into your mind, no matter how you answer it, once you're asking that, you are really beginning to examine the reality of our media system. It is creating results. It is telling us what our options are and how far we can go, but it doesn't respond to ideas. It doesn't respond to intellect. It's responding as a dumb beast to the bowl that has been set out by the most creative tweeter. And here's the fundamental of it. In the 2016 campaign, the critical primary was on Indiana. It was in Indiana where they said Donald Trump might secure the Republican nomination. It was also in Indiana where it was assumed that Hillary Clinton was going to win that primary and Bernie Sanders would be really on the sidelines. Well, on the night of the Indiana primary, Trump did win as expected. But Bernie Sanders posted a surprise victory. He beat Hillary Clinton by a large margin, and everybody was like, wow, that's a surprise. And I don't know, I'm a professional in this business. Surprise equates with news. It's supposed to be something you cover. But on the night of the Indiana primary, when Bernie Sanders was going to say something about how he did, it's not to tell you Bernie Sanders is a good guy, somebody, that's the point. The point is that he had posted a surprise. He had a newsworthy event. When he's supposed to talk about what had occurred, I turned my TV on. I wanted to see what he said. But they didn't have anything from Bernie Sanders' headquarters. They didn't have anything from his office. On the cable networks that night, they had a picture of a podium at Donald Trump's hotel. Now, Donald Trump wasn't at the podium. They had their camera focused on it, waiting for when he came out, and they didn't want to go to anything else, because if they went to anything else, they might miss a second of Donald Trump. And this confirms the dumb beast concept. Because when you are training an animal, your initial training is to give them that bowl of food and they come to eat it. But ultimately, if you've succeeded, the animal waits even when the food has not been put out, because it anticipates when it is coming. You have trained the animal to behave so well that it will pay attention to nothing else but waiting for you to put the bowl out for them. That is the American media system today, and that is a huge vulnerability in democracy. Last night, not ancient history of 2016, last night Donald Trump flew up to Pennsylvania to campaign in a special election. What did the cable networks do? They started covering his rally from the moment he went to the stage, and for the better part of an hour and a half, wall to wall, they covered Donald Trump. He insulted Chuck Todd. He said horrible things about Maxine Waters. He behaved as he has always behaved. He largely talked about himself in irrelevant and petty ways, and they covered him without interruption for an hour and a half. And up in that Pennsylvania district, there's a young man named Connor Lamb who's running as the Democratic candidate up there. And I don't know about you, but I'm betting that Connor Lamb doesn't get an hour and a half on every cable network between now and Tuesday's election. So once again, our media system is failing us. It's failing us. Now, it's not to pick up individual journalists telling us it isn't working. So what do we got? What do we got? Number one, you can lose the election and still become president. Number two, once you become president, you can put incredibly inept, wrong-headed people into positions of enormous authority. And number three, the free press that our founders initiated to hold this thing to account, to check it and balance it from the outside, is no longer capable of doing the job that must be done in order to prevent this thing from going wrong. Are you depressed? Are you depressed right now, brothers and sisters? Are you feeling down? Are you feeling like that hill ahead of you is the tallest hill you have ever seen? Are you feeling like somebody out in the desert without a glass of water? And I saw it as I was driving down here. Well, brothers and sisters, I'm not depressed. Because as bad as this thing is, as bad as the vulnerabilities that have been revealed, there is the reality that an awful lot of us are waking up. An awful lot of us are going up against these electoral barriers, gerrymandering, money in politics, the fundamental flaws of our media, the fundamental flaws of an electoral college system, all these barriers that we've got. People are still fighting on. They're actually moving around them. They're jumping in. They're running for city council. They're running for Congress. They're saying, I don't care what they tell me about how hard it is. I'm going to fight this fight. Tens of thousands of people stepping up. They're looking at how power is distributed in this country. They know the influence of special interests, and yet somehow they're saying no. Donald Trump became president of the United States. He was the media genius of our times, right? The guy literally knows how to make the dumb beast do what he wants it to do. He gets inaugurated for president of the United States, and he's owning that weekend until the next morning when millions of women go into the streets and say, we know all the barriers in our way, and so we know that one of us won't be enough. We know that 1,000 of us will not be enough. We know that 1,000,000 of us will not be enough. But we know that tens of millions of us in the largest demonstrations in the history of this country, that will force this thing open and we will be heard. Yes, the barriers are incredible. This is a messed up system. It has vulnerabilities in it. But unless we recognize that we have to fight harder, do more, and rise stronger, in this moment we can never repair any of those problems. So we have no excuses. We have to fight on. And frankly, brothers and sisters, we have to take our inspiration not from some 78-year-old or 75-year-old or 70-year-old or 58-year-old or 55-year-old or 30-year-old or 28-year-old. No. Let's take our inspiration from a bunch of high school students in Parkland.